Alright, so Tulsi Gabbard is back at it again, showing us her true colors, as a couple of days ago she managed to get a time slot on Fox News primetime, taking over for none other than the white nationalist propagandist Tucker Carlson, where she was basically blasting the raid on Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence by the FBI. So I want to get into this clip because I think it says a lot, not only about Tulsi Gabbard, but just more broadly how conservatives are reacting to this raid and how up in arms and hysterical that they are about it, as well as just completely ignoring the entire history of the FBI and pretending as if this is all completely new territory. So let's go ahead and jump into this clip here.
Now, whatever your views are on Donald Trump, there's no denying that the unprecedented raid on his Palm Beach home earlier this week has set our country on a dangerous new course.
Okay, so we're like 10 seconds into this clip, already gotta pause it. I mean, number one, it is unprecedented in the sense that we have never had a former president of the United States be raided by the FBI in this type of a way for potential criminal actions. So I guess that's unprecedented, but at the same time, it seems like that shouldn't be unprecedented because, in my opinion at least, throughout the entire history of the United States, basically every single president has done some sort of a criminal act, whether it's war crimes or otherwise just brazen corruption that would deserve an FBI raid or that would deserve some sort of accountability. So it is somewhat unprecedented, but in terms of taking us into a dangerous territory, I would think the exact opposite of that is true, because you finally may have one of the wealthiest and most corrupt elites within society finally facing just a tiny crumb of accountability in this circumstance. But let's go ahead and see where she goes from here.
And there's no turning back. The FBI's raid on Mar-a-Lago changed the country that we grew up in. We grew up believing that, hey, our government will apply the law equally to all Americans, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat.
Okay, so we already got to pause again. I mean, listen, she's obviously trying to frame this from like a partisan lens and saying that the government has never historically gone after Republicans or Democrats more so than the other. But in terms of like growing up, in her words, and, understanding these institutions, whether it's the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Justice, the US government in general, the idea that these institutions had any credibility throughout their entire history is just completely fucking ridiculous. And again, you can go and look throughout history, you can go and look at the FBI's involvement in programs like COINTELPRO, where they straight up were trying to infiltrate and crack down upon leftist coalitions like the Black Panthers. You could go look at the history of the FBI being weaponized in the war on drugs, which a Nixon administration official openly came out and stated that it was basically just to go after their political opponents, namely leftists and socialists and anti-war protesters. So again, the idea that like the FBI especially has ever been some sort of a respectable institution that is above the fray or that would never in any way go after political opponents is just completely fucking ridiculous. I mean, the entire history of the FBI, the CIA, all of these different various government institutions that represent the United States, a capitalist imperialist empire, all of these different institutions have always disproportionately targeted leftists and anti-war advocates. It just so happens that like this is one specific instance where they happen to be going after a right-wing criminal, in this case the former president. But again, the idea that like you were ever under the interpretation that these institutions were, against going after political opponents of theirs, completely ridiculous and absolutely ahistorical. But she continues here.
We're seeing more and more that country no longer exists. Law enforcement at the highest levels of government, whether it's the DOJ, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and now even the IRS, have been weaponized to target the political opponents of the Uniparty, the permanent Washington, and the Biden regime.
Okay, so there's a lot to say about that too. She kind of snuck in the IRS portion of this in line with the Department of Justice and the FBI. I think that those are pretty much like separate things right now. There's been a whole bunch of conservative like hysteria and freak out over the Inflation Reduction Act, including more funding and resources for the IRS, which I do think there could be some debate and disagreement there about, whether or not that is going to result in a slight uptick in auditing of like working class Americans or middle income Americans or something like that. There could be some fair pushback against that, but I don't think that that's disproportionately. If you actually go and look at the legislation, I don't think that disproportionately they are going to be targeting working class people, and I think that a lot of this funding is desperately needed because we know for a fact that the IRS already right now disproportionately targets working class Americans and small businesses because they straight up don't have the funding or the resources necessary in order to go after some of the wealthiest and well-off financial criminals in the country, including the billionaires and the corporations institutions who would be targeted under this legislation. So, I mean, there could be some disagreement on that, but kind of interesting how she just slid in that IRS thing, which is really just serving a narrative that is only going to further protect the wealthiest people and corporations within society. So she continues here, I guess.
Attorney General Merrick Garland has already issued a stark warning to anyone who dares to disagree with these tactics that are all hallmarks of a dictatorship.
Let me address recent unfounded attacks on the professionalism of the FBI and Justice Department agents and prosecutors. I will not stand by silently when their integrity is unfairly attacked.
So you are not allowed to disagree with the FBI. That is the new message.
Okay, well, that's just straight up not what he said. I mean, listen, I'm not going to sit here for a single second and defend the integrity of the FBI. Again, I don't think that they deserve any ounce of respect in any way, shape, or form. If I had my way as an actual socialist, as an actual leftist, I would agree with the, Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world or the Candace Owens of the world. We should straight up abolish the FBI. I think that would be to every American's benefit. I don't think that them or the CIA actually protect our safety, our security. I think that they are, right-wing, inherently right-wing capitalist organizations that defend the wealthiest people and corporations in society. But again, that would be a leftist critique, which is why you shouldn't believe people like Candace Owens or Marjorie Taylor Greene or Tulsi Gabbard when they come out and rail against the FBI, because they don't actually believe in dismantling the power structure that is the FBI. They just want to use the FBI to target their specific political opponents in any given circumstance. And we know this because that's exactly what they're talking about right now, right? They can go out and give a couple tweets about, abolish the FBI, defund the FBI, whatever the fuck. But at the end of the day, behind the scenes, they have, historically and to this day, especially under the Trump administration specifically, utilized these institutions in order to target their political enemies. So, I mean, again, the idea that this is like just purely a partisan thing, the idea that the FBI, who, by the way, the director of the FBI right now was appointed by Donald Trump, the idea that they're just like targeting conservatives right now or targeting Republicans on a sole basis is just completely fucking ridiculous.
The security state will label you an extremist for daring to challenge or disagree with the regime's weaponization of law enforcement.
Okay, so that's basically the end of her commentary in this portion of it. She goes on to play this, cringe Morning Joe clip where they defend the FBI and the integrity of these institutions and whatever the fuck. But again, that last point that she was just making there, that number one, you don't have any right whatsoever to criticize the FBI. That's not what Merrick Garland was saying in that clip. I'm not a fan of Merrick Garland, obviously not a fan of the FBI, but that's just straight up not what he was saying. You can go and criticize the FBI all you want, but at the end of the day, we have seen, numerous different attacks against, there was that one in Cincinnati, Ohio, where a dude straight up went in and tried to fire off a nail gun and then got into this standoff situation where he ended up getting killed by the police department there. So, I mean, there have been legitimate attacks against FBI agents recently in the wake of this, as conservatives have been freaking out, calling for, war. We had Steven Crowder coming out and saying war is tomorrow in the wake of this. So, they're just completely freaking out and shitting and pissing their pants over something that honestly really isn't that big of a deal. So, I mean, it could be potentially, but in terms of this being the thing that gets Donald Trump locked away in prison or something like that, I think that that's a little bit of a stretch. And so I think that the freak out from conservatives have been significantly overblown, to say the least. But just to give you a little bit of information in terms of what they actually found here, it's still somewhat limited information that we have at our disposal, but just in terms of what they were looking for, what they found in this, and how this could connect to other stories that are going on right now. They say here from CNBC that the FBI seized multiple sets of documents marked top secret from former President Donald Trump's Florida resort home at Mar-a-Lago when agents raided it on Monday, according to a search warrant that was unsealed on Friday. So this was an interesting part of this. Donald Trump and conservatives were basically coming out and demanding that the DOJ release the search warrant, and basically Merrick Garland called their bluff and said, okay, I'll do that. And we got some of this information out of that, but they say that the warrant directed agents to seize all physical documents and records constituting evidence, contraband, fruits of crime, or other items illegally possessed in violation of 3 laws related to handling of government documents. And they say the warrant indicates that statutes relating to espionage and obstruction of justice are the foundation for the search, and convictions under these statutes can bring fines or prison sentences. Again, whether or not he's actually going to be sent to prison over this, I have my doubts on that. I don't think that, mishandling of documents would be enough to finally be the thing that, of all of the millions of different examples that you could have of criminal behavior from Trump and his various organizations and family members. I have my doubts that this would be the thing that sends that over the edge. But in terms of like what the potential crimes are that they're actually talking about, they say espionage and obstruction of justice are the foundation for the search. Now, you might see espionage and immediately jump to the conclusion that like, oh, that means he's, whatever, selling documents to the Russians or whoever it may be in order to, commit espionage against the United States. But as Ken Klippenstein pointed out here, that framing is sort of misleading. And he says the Espionage Act covers willful mishandling of national defense information, a serious crime, but not like espionage in the way that you would typically think of it. So, it could be espionage in a technical sense, not in the way that you would typically, associate that word in this circumstance, but mishandling of national defense information, according to what they say they got in this raid, seems like it could definitely fit the definition of that. And beyond that, I mean, if you want to get, somewhat more conspiratorial here and say that potentially some of the documents, especially ones relating to nuclear information, which apparently was part of what they found in this raid, if you want to get a little bit more conspiratorial on that, which honestly, maybe this isn't that much of a conspiracy, but there is this angle that I think is worthy of discussion right now. So if you go back to 2019, there were reports that apparently Trump's administration was looking for ways to help Saudi Arabia build a nuclear weapon. Again, we don't know the exact information, but we know that during this raid, they found some sensitive documents relating to nuclear top secrets. So, that could be a potential part of this, as we also know that, the Saudis have been funneling money to his various family members and, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who got $2 billion from the Saudis, even after their own financial experts said this guy shouldn't be trusted in any way, shape, or form. Mohammed bin Salman overrode them and decided to give him a $2 billion handout to his investment firm. You also obviously have the angle of Trump doing this live golf tour, where basically he's making who knows how many millions of dollars off of this contract with the Saudis, again, to host these events at his golf tours, to have him participate in them. So there is that angle that could be somewhat of an interesting development if we see more information on exactly what type of information they were looking for, exactly how he may have mishandled it or whatever. But listen, I mean, at the end of the day, Tulsi Gabbard's framing on this, just like every conservative's framing on this, has just been completely disingenuous. And again, please don't for a single second believe conservatives who are calling for like defunding the FBI or whatever. Don't believe them to be genuine in any way, shape, or form. They don't want to confront any of the power centers that exist in this country right now. They just want them to be solely used against their political enemies. You know that because none of these conservatives said a single goddamn thing about whether it's the Espionage Act with, Julian Assange being prosecuted under the same thing for exposing the crimes of the empire. They didn't say a single goddamn thing. If anything, they defended it back during, the 60s, during the COINTELPRO FBI infiltration of leftist groups, or the war on drugs, which was put in place specifically to crack down on anti-war voices and socialist organizations and leftists as well. So, I mean, whether or not you want to, believe them or take them at their word, or, try to work with them on defunding these agencies, which I absolutely would support, at the end of the day, they don't actually believe in dismantling these power structures. They just want them to be used for their own partisan political angles, which is kind of ironic because her entire commentary there was about how the FBI and the DOJ and all these other departments are purely partisan actors, which is just completely ridiculous on so many different angles. Number one, because again, all of these institutions throughout their entire history have always leaned to the right, to say the least. I mean, they are inherently reactionary, right-wing institutions that serve the interests of capital, that serve the interests of the U.S. government, that also serves the interests of capital. And, this is just one specific instance where, this criminal billionaire who has, committed so many different crimes, whether it's the, violations of the emoluments clause as he was president, taking money at his hotels from the Saudis, whether it's the investigation that he's facing in Manhattan over tax fraud, basically, and lying about the valuations of his properties, whether it's, the investigation in Georgia about him trying to pressure the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, to basically find him 11,000 votes and overturn the election for him. I mean, so many different ways that you could analyze the history of Donald Trump's criminality, but the idea that, like, these people are finally coming out of the woodworks, they're finally willing to criticize these government agencies, and it's just when their guy happened to be raided in this circumstance. I mean, it's just brazenly showing you exactly what their true motives are here. It's not to actually confront the elites within society. It's not to confront, a government that is targeting innocent Americans. This is just a circumstance where, a wealthy, powerful criminal, in the case of Donald Trump, maybe is facing a tiny degree of accountability for his various criminal acts. And of course, they're coming out and giving a reactionary defense of all all of that in a knee-jerk way where they don't really have any actual angle that they can approach this from that is substantive or that actually gets to the heart of the core problems here or the problems with these institutions. They're just doing this because they want to protect their big daddy Donald Trump, who, I guess got his feelings hurt in the wake of a raid because he was withholding classified documents relating to a whole host of different, vitally important national secrets or whatever the fuck, just pissing and shitting their pants over the fact that maybe one of our elites within society could actually face a tiny degree of accountability.